Joe Aratari, welcome to the Soccer Queens podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm really excited for this episode.
I think the listeners are as well. When I announced that you were coming on my show, everyone was like, oh my gosh, my two favorite soccer people. So this will be really fun. And I know you have a lot of experience working with high school girls soccer players who also play in the Ecnl and in college as well. But just kind of give a background on your playing experience and then how you got into strength and conditioning.
Yeah, I'll try to keep the Spark Note version here, but so just like, most soccer kids that players that play in college, did the club system growing up. So I'm from Western New York, the Rochester area. I got into the club scene a little bit later, but definitely fortunate for that experience. And then I ended up playing 4 years in college. And then really from there, I just, back then when I was in college, wasn't too long ago, but the 2009, 2013, 14 range, wasn't really sure what to do as far as my training. So I was always into lifting, always into, the sport performance side of things. But just like most of us, like I trained like a bodybuilder just because that's what I knew at the time. I never had a full-time strength coach. But I just really was into training, right, for my sport. Um, Ended up like not in my eyes maximizing my performance. And, I feel like 10 years after college, like I feel better. I run faster. I jump higher. I'm stronger now than I was in college. And I wish I knew what I knew then, but that's kind of the process. But through just like trial and error, started really getting passionate about the field. And then long story short, just I had a criminal justice degree and then I just kind of switched completely after college. I went back to get another degree in exercise science. And just a long story short, like ended up at a private facility. I work at Next Level Strength and Conditioning, and I started there in 2015, and I'm still there. So that's been really my only job in this field. But through that, I've been able to work at high schools. So I'm currently at a high school right now. And I've worked in the D3 sector as well as the strength coach for men's and women's side. I've worked with both their soccer teams. And then as well with the private sector, see a lot of kids. So as you mentioned, a lot of kids that just want to get better for their high school sport. And then certainly do train a lot of kids that go on to play at high level, Division 3, Division 2, and Division 1 schools. So yeah, that's kind of the Spark Note version. I've been really fortunate to work with a lot of athletes, and I also think I'm fortunate to see all the sides, between private, high school, college, club. I work with professional lacrosse as well. So like even seeing that side of things across multiple sports and how there are a lot of similarities, but then also like how do I get these high school kids to, if they want to play college, like what it takes to play in college. And then, okay, you want to play pro, what does it take to be a pro athlete? So I think I'm fortunate in that side.
It's nice to hear you're still at next level, and I'm sure you've been able to see a lot of your athletes grow over the years. And that's why I really love talking to other private sector strength coaches because they spend so much time with their athletes, or as much as we want to or can. And that's what we're going to talk about today is the craziness of the high school soccer schedule and then that transition back into club season or ECNL. And it seems like girls are just kind of blasting through the entire year. And it's like, okay, when do we have time to really taper off after the high school season before that next showcase when you have to be on and ready for college coaches? So, what are some things you have done in that transition period to just make sure your girls are fresh going from high school to club season?
Yeah. And just even backtracking on that, I sometimes, I don't want to get into a rant, but like I sometimes, when you look at the college model where, again, I've worked in the Division 3 sector and I'm sure it's similar at the higher levels. Like if you unfortunately lose in conference play, or if you lose in the NCAA tournament, or even if you win the whole thing, you have a little bit of rest period. Like college coaches, they from a rule standpoint, but also they know like, hey, I'm gonna let my kids be, and they really don't do too much with them right after their season. So I've been fortunate to have a lot of teams go in the NCAA tournament, and they might lose in the first round, but we typically don't pick up training as a group until after their winter break. I might program them a couple things to do in December, and then they have finals. But as a group, we don't really get going until they come back into like January, and that's not the case for the high school kids. So it's almost ironic where these kids are training to be at that level, and this is what they do in college. But what do they do right after their high school season? And in my area in New York, like a good high school season, you're going into late October, but if you lose in your conference play, they just go right into their club like the next day, right? Um, and as we were talking before, like some of these kids were having Sunday sessions during their high school season. So they practice or play Monday through Saturday, and then they have a Sunday skill session or something. So it is to your point, like hard, like what do we do right after that transition period or their high school season? Um, I have like all the kids that I train privately, I do have like a list of their contacts, like obviously their numbers. And the first thing I do is I send a note out, just letting them know, like, hey, like this is the game plan for what we need to do this off season. I'm gonna give you a buffer period. Like if you need a little bit of time, take that time. And I try to make that as low pressure as possible because some kids do need, whether we want to say it's right or not, like they do need that 2 maybe week break of just nothing. Um, or at least from the lifting side, because like we said, like they might just have to go right back into their club. So I try to really like make that a point. Like there's no rush to get back into this. If you're and in my example, like a lot of the girls that I do train, like just happen to play soccer. So there's really not, in my eyes, a rush. Like we have some time. But when it comes to like when we do actually get back, like I think the big things that I focus on are, trying to just regain like I guess I would say like a consistent schedule. Like, what are we doing as far as your schedule? So, how many days a week do you have soccer? And then we work backwards from there. So, I really like using like this rule of five. I don't love when my kids are going more than 5 days a week of playing and or doing something, and it does happen. Um, I really don't love when they go more than six, and that's when we have to have those serious conversations. But using five as a reference, if my kids are playing 4 days a week, then we have to get at least 1 day of training in, and then we work backwards from there. Now, in my perfect, and I'm sure you would agree, many others, like I think two is really the magic spot for a lot of these busy club kids. And I try to figure out a way we can get our 2 days in. But if we have to get 2 days in and that causes them to have to go 6 days a week, then I just take that day off because I truly think for their long term, they need those 2 days off. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think like the first thing we look at is number one, like like what's our schedule, and then let's try to just stay consistent. So whether it's 1 day a week, 2 days a week, um, most of my kids aren't coming 3 days a week in their off season just based on their schedule. I just got done training a girl today, and she goes, Monday, Thursday, Wednesday, Saturdays. So I mean, Friday they have off from school today, but like this was the day that just works for her. And of course, we can try to fit in a Sunday, but is that worth it for her or honestly for my sake? You know what I mean? So as far as like, I guess like big rocks, like I definitely think the schedule piece. For those that are listening to this that might not have a person, I think the biggest question you have to ask yourself, whether you're a parent, a club coach, or more importantly, like an athlete, is like, who are you working with? And I think that's like a really big thing you have to decide. And I know that seems simple, but are you working by yourself at just your local gym? Or are you committed to find a legit professional, whether that's someone in your area? Certainly there's online resources, right? Like we both do online training. There's other great coaches online, but I think you have to ask yourself, again, if you don't have a person who you're working with, because ultimately, like that is a huge deciding factor on what they do with you, but also the schedule piece as well. So I guess like backtracking, I think like if you're just listening to this and you don't have a person, I think you have to ask yourself like who am I working with and then what am I doing? Because if you have a legit person or a legit person that's in person or an online reference, certainly their program is going to be a little bit more ideal. It's going to be comprehensive. It's going to cover all the big rocks you need from speed, agility, power development, strength. It's probably going to be laid out more ideal in a sport performance program than, in my example, like most kids don't know how to work out for themselves, if that makes sense.
It is so important to find a good performance coach to be able to plan around the practice and game schedule, but also to give the right movements based on the appropriate timing of that transition period and then the progression within the rest of the off season. So, what types of movements and physical qualities are you focusing on in this transition period?
Yeah. I think when I look at most kids, so again, I'm gonna use the girl that's coming. I have another girl, the ECNL girl, is coming in later today. She went pretty much her whole fall without doing any strength training. We did a couple sessions in person, but they also have a strength coach at their high school that, unfortunately, they just don't utilize as much. So I'm just making a generalization from pretty much August until about, November. She's done very little, just regaining joint mobility, regaining joint stability. And I know that seems really, really basic, but it's needed. So looking from the ground up, what's the first joint? Like I'm looking at toe, right? Like I know it seems weird, but like toe mobility and toe health and foot health and ankle health. So trying to get real like as much mobility back in our toes. So doing a lot of shoes off work, using lacrosse balls, just like doing a lot of mobility on the lower extremities. Trying to regain some ankle mobility they might have lost or maybe they just need. Um, Knee stability. So like we'll do a lot of like isometrics and just like direct knee health work. So taking a little bit of page out of Tom Brobeck's, he's does a lot of knee work and I love his page. But we'll do like a lot of like Spanish squats and TKEs and just like long duration split squats and just isometrics. And really like I guess I'm kind of coining a lot of this stuff is like tissue remodeling. And just like gaining back a little bit of a base of training. Certainly, I'm not demanding they're lifting the heaviest weight. Like that's not our goal in this November period. For me, it's just like, hey, let's slowly start getting back into training. Um, with that said, like I do still push the envelope on speed development, and I'm still getting back into like our acceleration work. So again, in my example, unfortunately, I haven't been able to see some of these kids in a couple months. We're not doing as much like long, like flying 10 sprints, but we're doing a lot of like acceleration work. Um, I guess I could say like simple power work, whether that's just like box jumps, like, hurdle hops and sticks, maybe just like hang poles and dumbbell jumps and things like that. Because again, like when you look at residuals, power and speed really diminish after about like 7 to 10 days. And unfortunately, they go their whole high school season without doing that stuff. So they probably have lost a little bit of power and speed, and we're trying to just get those traits to get back up. Um, so in terms of those, I am trying to like really get those back up quickly, because again, like they are trying to gear their training towards like their really important showcases and tournaments, and that's where they're probably getting the most recruited from. Um, in terms of strength, like I'm sure a lot of other people would agree with this. It's a slow burn. Like we're just trying to regain strength. Once we get past like the first couple weeks, again, like the first session or two, we do a ton of mobility, like way more mobility than we usually do. And we might do a lot like more isometrics. But once we get past those first couple weeks, so let's just say we're in December, we're probably going to focus on like some simple strength. And we tend to go back into like a modified like almost like triphasic phase, and that's just what we do. But we'll do like a lot of like eccentrics, and then we'll kind of do 2 weeks of isometrics, and then gearing up towards like the new year. That's when we start like really start pushing like our heavier lifting. So that might take like while we like work up to heavy loads, almost like 8 weeks. It might be like a 6 week transition period where we're just easing back into our off season. And then as we get into January into like the spring, I guess the rest of the winter and spring, that's where we just go through like our normal off season program. Um, I know that seems like it takes a while to get back into that, but I think it's necessary. Um, a lot of these kids, at least who I'm working with, are going August, September, October of 6 days a week, sometimes 7 days a week of training. Um, to me, like there's no need to really rush. Like when they are just playing soccer as their only sport, I think those weeks in November and December are really important to establish movement proficiency. They might have lost, again, as I mentioned, mobility and stability. I think it takes those weeks to build up. Um, I think again, just power and strength are the only things that I'm okay with, like getting right back into it, because on their tournaments and showcases, they're going to have to sprint. They're going to have to change direction. So I need to prepare them off the field with that stuff on a weekly basis.
I'm glad you mentioned the speed component too, because that's one thing I do see a lot of when players come off that high school season. They've really lost that twitchiness and that power.
Oh
And
yeah.
yeah, it's really crazy how quickly that is lost. But I think it is important to constantly hammer that speed. Obviously, not having them go right into it right away. I like how you do like the shorter accelerations and then build back up to that max velocity again. And how many times a week are you doing that to really like get a good speed improvement? Is it one time a week, two times a week? What do you see works best?
Yeah, in a perfect world, I would love to see kids doing it twice a week. And I'll kind of give you an example of our summer schedule. We have our kids come in, like our high level kids, we almost mandate you have to come in 3 days a week. We just feel like that's what they need in their summer period. Um, but in a perfect model, if we're doing 2 days a week, one day is going to be more like our acceleration, and we still use like our change of direction. Like that still can kind of fit into that bucket. So to give an example, if I have a kid coming in Monday, Wednesday, Monday might be our straight ahead speed, or excuse me, straight ahead acceleration work, where we're working anywhere from like 5 to 15 yards. Um, Within that, we also like have, sled marches and linear hurdle hops and hurdle jumps and box jumps, like straight ahead stuff. And then there might be one Monday we use as like a lateral acceleration day or change of direction day, right? So 5, 10, 5s, or even just like reactive races, reactive change of direction, reactive agility work. Honestly, like we do like a ton of tag, like it's free flowing, like it's reactive. If you have a couple kids like on our turf, or endless, like honestly, gameplay, like stuff that's more situational, like. And then on, let's just say it's Wednesday, that might be like our max velocity day where we're opening it up a little bit. We're doing 20, 30, 40 yard sprints. We're probably doing a lot more intensive plyometrics as our prep work. So like after our dynamic work, we might be doing like a lot more like straight leg bounds and, you know, pogos and things of that sort. Flutter kicks, like just to prime the hamstrings before we let go. As far as what we do, like as far as our set groups, but also me personally, we track a lot. So we do a ton of vertical jumps, approach jumps, depth jumps, just trying to get as much data as we can on kids. Um, so that we do put that into our power bucket. But then when we do sprint, we have laser timers, and we're tracking their 5 yard build in sprints. So they're 10-yard sprints, but they get a 5 yard build in. So that's more of our acceleration, versus our like 15 and 20 yard build in, which is more of our max velocity. So in a perfect world, yeah, twice a week. In a realistic world, like some of my kids legitimately can only get in once a week. So obviously, going back to our point, when you have a legit strength coach, they will, or they at least they should know how to modify. So if I see a kid once a week, I know, okay, what are my big rocks? If I'm only seeing you once a week, I'm certainly going to do a full body strength day. But if I only see you once a week, we're going to do some sprints, whether that's acceleration or max velocity. Um, Now, when I see my kids twice a week, I like to really segment their splits, where we do one day of the week. We might do like just traditional max effort work where our rep schemes for our main lifts are pretty low. Um, we're trying to build strength. And again, this is like in our like December, January, and so forth. But then as they come in closer to the weekend when they have their showcases and tournaments, we treat that as like their dynamic effort day. So you can almost say it's like modified conjugate split, like a max effort and dynamic effort day. Um, but that's how I like to kind of format my club athletes when they can only get in twice a week. And then certainly if they could train 3 days a week, then that third day might look a little different. Um, but yeah, to kind of go back to your original question, 2 days I think is a really, really great training split as far as strength training and speed development. I wish all my kids could get in 2 days a week. Unfortunately, that's just not the case. A lot of my kids do come in once.
Few times a week is pretty magical, and I think the athletes who do it really, really make some great gains, and then the athletes who are doing the 1 a week, they watch the other girls and they're like, "Hmm, maybe I should bump it up to twice a week." So, it helps when they see the athletes getting other results and girls realize they need to make time for speed training.
Right. And when you look at what you can do in a week, I mean, strength residual lasts about a month. So if you're training once a week, you're training once every 7 days. It I always say like once a week's really, really good for maintaining. Like I think you can maintain once a week. It is really hard to build anything on once a week. Like you might slowly build, but just like compound interest, like if you can come in 2 days a week, you're going to be so much like you're getting twice as much work as that one person, that kid that's getting 1 day a week. And then when you look at the competitiveness of recruiting and trying to be your best when it matters most at these showcases, like actually have something to showcase. Like, yes, obviously skill. That's the hierarchy, right? If you're a good soccer player, a great soccer player, you're gonna get recruited. But then it's the other things too, right? The power, the speed, the like just performing better on the field. Like those are the traits that college coaches love to see. And if you're not training them, you're just not going to get better at them, right?
I do wanna come back to you mentioning your remote training, and I think this is where remote training can get really valuable for people, because if they find that they can't make time for a commute to a performance coach, then remote training can be a really good option because you're being efficient with your time, you can do the workouts in the comfort of your own home or at the park in the neighborhood, and you can still make a lot of gains. I think some remote programs can be really impactful if girls really commit to the home workouts and do them, or maybe even like a hybrid situation where they see you once a week and then that second day of speed they do at home. I mean, man, what a difference that will make. I think that can be really valuable for people.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, it does take a lot. I think people that get into remote training, like this could be advice for coaches that might want to do it, but also for athletes. I guess I'll go with the athlete one, but like it does require, and you've been there, like you do it, like so much accountability, and they have to know what they're getting themselves into because like there might be things that you're asking of kids, and if they're not doing that portion, I don't want to say they're wasting their time and money, but like there is a financial commitment to that, and they need to be on the same page, like the coach and the athlete. Of like, if I'm the coach asking for video feedback and you're not giving me the feedback, like how, it's going to be very, very, very hard to help you. Because of that, like I don't know about you, but I've had situations like that. I've kind of created some tiers, and I think they've helped me where I have one tier of online training that's just templates, and I'm pretty straightforward where it's like, hey, this is a really good 3 6 month program. It's pretty much click and buy and go, where like the videos are embedded. Certainly there's like modifications if you need it, but there's really not much interaction with me. I'll help with like email support and things like if someone really needs that, but there's not as much like direct coaching. And I think that works for the kid that is maybe more experienced, like they know what they're doing, and they just need a really solid template. Um, and then certainly like you do as well. Like there are the I guess more intensive models where it's like weekly check-ins, like I'm looking at their program on a weekly basis. If we have like a testing day or if I'm looking at their speed development and I want to make a tweak, like I again get video feedback from them. Um, so yeah, I think I would 100% agree. Remote training is definitely very valuable, and I think it has helped a lot of kids, especially in situations where unfortunately, like some kids really don't have access to a good high school strength coach, or maybe in their area they don't have anything, or maybe they just don't have someone they like connect with, or they find will help them. So yeah, I mean the next best option like is to go look online, right? Like look for really good resources and find professionals that you trust and that have, I think, a good track record. um and then, like, even if you can't afford their programs, like, people like you, me, many, many others put out free content all day, like, every day, right? So I think, like, even if you have to at the, very least, like, do your own programming, like, you could still learn a lot from the resources that a lot of professionals put out.
Is there anything else you want to leave the listeners with in regards to transitioning from high school to club, or how to manage their load during the season and during the transition phase?
Yeah, I think there needs to be a mindset of, like, number one, like if you are listening and you aren't currently doing something because it's a time constraint or oh, I'm just so exhausted. Like again, like that really does come back to like you're doing a lot. I think you have to look at what the end goal is. And if your end goal is to play in college, then there needs to be a mindset shift, which will hopefully lead to a scheduling shift. Because if you're not currently doing something and your goal is to play, even if it is to play in high school, just at the highest level you can, or college or pro, you just have to look at like what those teams are doing. And I, I would almost guarantee most, if not all, teams in the Division One, D2, D3 sector are doing some type of training, right? They value it at some level. I don't know about you, but I've worked with many, many college kids from D2, D3, D1, and they all do training. I haven't really found a school that doesn't do too much. So if that's your goal and you aren't training, then you need to make this a priority because it is important. Um, Now, with that said, like you don't need to like if you're a high school girl, like you don't need to deadlift the most or bench the most or squat the most. You don't need to be in the 300s. Like that's not the goal. You just need to have a decent base, and you need to like continue to like tap into those qualities so a you stay healthy, um and then obviously make improvements. And then same thing with power and speed. Like if you're not at a certain baseline, or a I don't want to say good enough score, like those are all trainable traits. So again, going on a little tangent, if you're good enough where you're scoring 10 goals a game, we can have a conversation then. But until then, this is something that needs to be prioritized. And unfortunately, a lot of times it isn't, right? I also think, and we've touched on this, if it is only 1 day a week, that's better than nothing, right? 52 workouts a year is better than 0 workouts. Obviously, if you can double that 52 2 times a week, that's way more ideal. But just because you can't train as hard, or as much as you want, don't, um, disvalue what 1 day a week of training can do. And even going a step below that, like don't underestimate like what just movement can do. Like even if it's at home doing air squats or push-ups or hip mobility or single leg RDLs or Nordics, like even if it's the low hanging fruit and you're doing something, that's a way more ideal situation than completely doing nothing. Um, I think again, just like advice or tips or I guess mindset is like this is something that you need to prioritize. It's for your longevity, it's for your health. Um, Play like the long game. Like there's no need to just crush yourself with lifting or training. Give yourself a little like have some grace. Allow yourself to have days off, like when you're feeling tired or beat up. Like that's usually an indication you need a day off. And just enjoy the process, because if you really want to do this throughout high school and potentially college or beyond college, you have to enjoy going to work, right? Or going to do your work. So, make sure your training is fun. Like if it's just, all right, we're going to show up and lift and sprint and it's not enjoyable, try to switch something up. Because I think that's a huge part of the process. And the longer I've gotten in this, I've become way more on the like, I don't want to say like the yes, the mental health side, but like the longevity of making sure kids are enjoying what they're doing. Um, and again, like you've seen it, I've seen it, like the amount of burnout these kids are having, both physical, mental. Like I want to be that source that kids really enjoy coming to the gym, where they're looking forward to it. Like that's what I want to like give them. So, again, if you're listening to this, just try to find ways where you really are enjoying what you're doing. And I think you'll just continue to show up and it won't feel like work.
That's so brilliant. And everyone, please follow Joe. I am going to include all of his social media links in the description below. He has a lot of great free content, obviously, with some great videos of drills he's doing with his girls' soccer players. But if you do want to work with him and have more accountability and more customized programming, he also does remote training options. So be sure to check those out on his website as well and reach out at any time. He's someone who's always here to help and just wants to see his athletes develop and stay healthy, not just for sports, but for a lifetime, which I really think that's what this is all about. So, Joe, thank you again. This was super. And I'll see everyone on next week's episode.